It's been a very tense week, really, hasn't it? Since it's all been kicking off in the Middle East. And after what seems like a pretty successful campaign by Israel targeting very specific sites in Iran, the sites that are responsible potentially for enriching uranium, developing nuclear warheads, having taken out a host of some of their most bloodthirsty military leaders. And at one point, it seems, the mad Ayatollah himself scurrying off into a bunker. Various flights, official-looking flights, taking off to Oman. And everyone's saying, who is that? Why are they being evacuated? Is this for talks? And Donald Trump threatening in typical Trumpian language on Truth Social. We might kill you, or we might not. You better get round the table and negotiate. I've given you all the time. But now it seems that those threats he's going to extend for another 2 weeks because he says that there's potentially a good chance there could be some sort of deal as European leaders meet the foreign minister of Iran in Geneva today. And so he's sort of provided what could be a 2-week reprieve. Or has he? Let's speak now to Andrew Fox, Defence, Middle East and Disinformation expert, a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Good morning to you, Andrew.
Hi, how's it going?
Yeah, very well, very well. Now, I'm trying to wrap my head around Donald Trump going from tough talk. I mean, we've seen this before with Donald Trump threatening whether it be tariffs or deportations or travel bans, now threatening to literally blow up the Ayatollah and potentially use that bunker buster to get to some of those subterranean nuclear layers. But after conversations with his inner circle in the Situation Room, I wonder what's changed, or has anything changed?
I don't think so. I think it's been a clear escalatory pathway by the Americans to try and force a deal. Mr. Trump gave Iran 60 days. They didn't take the threat seriously, so he then okayed the Israeli strikes. But his rhetoric throughout has been one of the door is open for a deal. I told you what would happen. Now you need to surrender. You know, he's always a man that would prefer a deal. And it makes domestic sense because we know people like J.D. Vance oppose international military engagements. We know a lot of the MAGA base, the America First crowd, are pretty upset. And actually a deal would be amazing domestically for Trump because he could say that he pressured the Iranians using the threat of military force. But came away with a deal without needing to use it. So that would be the absolute gold-plated scenario for him.
But would that be a gold-plated scenario for the Israelis? Because Trump was the man who pulled out of the last JCPOA, the last nuclear deal with Iran, because, well, he got the sense that they weren't really keeping up their end. And nobody needs to enrich uranium to over 60% unless they're planning to whack it in a weapon of mass destruction. Of course, there is that hangover from Iraq and the Bush-Blair era, and whether or not Saddam Hussein had chemical weapons, and surely that is having an impact politically in America. But the point is this: you can't really negotiate with a terrorist who wants to destroy your country. So would a deal be acceptable to Israel? Would it be acceptable to the West, full stop?
Well, Israel don't really get a say at this point, unfortunately. There are huge strategic advantages to their reliance on Washington, but there are also huge disadvantages. And that is one. If Trump makes a deal, then a deal is made. If Israel continues to bomb after a deal is made, then clearly that will have strategically enormous ramifications. And I can see Trump hugely punishing the Israelis for doing that. So Israel, I suspect, will do as they're told. In terms of the West, look, there's significant risks in regime change. I think that's been implied by what Israel is trying to do. That could easily go much worse than it goes much better. And the ability to bomb every single part of Iran's nuclear program is also exceptionally challenging from a military perspective. There are limits to what you can achieve by military force, particularly without American air power coming into the fight. So I think we're in a place here where there is going to end up being some diplomatic fudging unless Mr. Trump changes his mind and brings the might of the US Air Force into the battle.
So when Israel say, and I think it was actually Israel Katz himself who said, we have so much more up our sleeves. You see what we did to Hezbollah? We have got so many more cards that we can play. It's very clear from targeting some of those military leaders and taking out nuclear scientists that they have managed to infiltrate the Iranian regime to such a degree that they do seem to be able to launch attacks discriminately against key individuals. What would be stopping Israel from wanting to continue with that? Because otherwise they're just going to wake up the next day and the next day and the next day with potentially an emboldened Iran who have never played by the rules and unlikely to do so in the future.
Well, if you look at it this way, Iran has been absolutely battered and humiliated for the last week. There have been significant attritional damages to their nuclear program. It will have undoubtedly set them back a number of years. The bigger question, I think, is what else can you realistically do? And as I said, without American air power, there's only so far you can go. Regime change comes with significant challenges. And in terms of infiltration of the regime, then that is the next escalatory step, I think, for Israel, is if they to start to strike the political echelon within Iran, and the clerical echelon, of course, being a theocracy as it is. The clerics and the mullahs have significant power. I think the reason they haven't done that so far is probably because Washington has told them not to. And so we're in this kind of three-way debate at the moment, with America trying to press the brakes, Israel keen to push on, and Iran having a policy of strategic patience where they think they can just wait this out is essentially what they're trying to do. A few very mediocre counter-punches with their missile barrages, which have really only 5% penetrated Israel's missile defense systems. And then at the end of it, Iran will try and claim a resistance narrative to try and shore up domestic perception. So it's this three-way challenge that's proving so difficult to negotiate at the moment.
Why is a regime change potentially so ominous? I mean, my understanding is 80% of the Iranian population would quite like to see that happen.
Potentially, but what happens next is always the question, because as soon as you remove a regime, you create a vortex, and the big question is who fills that vortex. Now, a uprising is possible, but there's no real unity at the moment, on the Iranian side. There's a number of disparate groups who all have slightly different objectives. Pahlavi, the son of the old Shah, is probably the likely candidate, but he's still very unpopular with parts of the Iranian population because they remember how brutal his father was. So that's not a gold-plated solution. Other things that might happen, that the country could fracture along ethnic lines and we end up with something like Syria. Or it could be even worse, and you get a Republican Guard hardliner take over in a military coup style affair, and then you're left with probably an even worse situation than you were before the war started. Western leaders traditionally always prefer the status quo and stability to chaos.
A sort of better the devil you know approach, having learnt lessons from removing Gaddafi and the like.
Exactly that. And so as a result, they are always extremely hesitant to push something that has so many chaotic potential options as regime change.
What are the risks here? Because there have been reports that the IRGC are very, they have their sleeper cells in our own country, that they could target us in retaliation for any involvement that they perceive we might have in enabling Israel's campaign. And then just today, we wake up to find that pro-Palestine protesters have managed to damage RAF planes, what should be one of our most secure air bases. I think it's one of our biggest military air bases of Brize Norton. You put those two things together and it sends a chill down your spine, doesn't it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I'm a little bit more relaxed about the sleeper cell thing than some. I think we're straying into conspiracy theory space at that point. Particularly as our security services have proven exceptionally good at intercepting Iranian malign actors on UK soil. So I would dial back the stuff on sleeper cells. I'm not convinced at all that is a particularly significant threat that our security services aren't all over. There is a very big difference though between the national security services and the gate guards at Brize Norton, who frankly have had a shocker. And Brize Norton's base commander, I think, has some very serious answers to give about how this was able to happen, and that is something that really needs looking into by the MOD, because these domestic terrorists, Palestine Action, how they're not prescribed yet, I'm not sure. These are the guys who attacked police officers with sledgehammers when breaking into an arms factory just before Christmas. They are clearly something the government is not all over, and that significant action needs taking against Palestine Action that goes beyond normal criminal justice, and this group needs to be prescribed as domestic terrorists.
Andrew, thank you ever so much for giving us the outpourings of your genius brain on those topics.